Alright, so I'm not going to waste any time here. I already talked extensively on this topic in both my Absolute End video and my collab video with Andrew on his channel. Anyone who's watched either of those videos all the way through should already know why I despise this twist at the end of finale, where it's revealed Uzi and Sin merged together after the latter's core was consumed. This opened up a whole can of lore contradictions the show established, mainly in relation to character deaths and how retroactively making a certain group of characters completely immortal undermines the stakes of the entire series. In this video, I'm going to explain why merging these two together was a terrible decision from a writing standpoint, along with why the core concept of merging is worse than the alternatives that actually could work with what the show has established without undermining the rest of the narrative. I also feel as though it's necessary to address some of the defenses I've seen for Sin merging with Uzi. One of them being that it's only possible for Sin to do this because she's the original host of the solver, and it's not something that just any solver drone can do. First of all, we have absolutely no reason to assume other solver drones aren't also capable of this. Doll is the weakest solver drone in the show that we know of, and not only is she now a ghost as the end credits established, but there's also some indication that Doll may have actually merged with Sin based on the screenshot. Yet for some reason, Sin does not have a red gradient in her eyes. It's almost like Liam didn't plan this far ahead and just shoved this easy to miss detail in at the last second, which is also another big issue merging has. There's almost no build up to it whatsoever. Aside from Sin supposedly assimilated data of drones she consumes, we have no reason to assume a drone's mind can survive this process, and not enough attention is drawn to it if they can. The closest thing we get to an implication of this is Jay retaining her memories after being destroyed and revived, which doesn't make any sense at all if she's a clone or backup that Sin had in case something happened to her. So the fact that Jay remembers the events of the pilot itself blatantly contradicts her supposedly being a backup, when in reality Sin just retrieved Jay's data and put it into a new body. This contradiction also did unneeded damage to cloning a drone's mind, which is conceptually a lot more interesting than merging. We'll get to that in a bit. Assimilation, or merging if it was good, could have been used as an effective horror element if it was established early on that assimilated drones are still conscious and are in a state of agony while they're inside the solver of another drone. But it's never mentioned or shown, and Sin seems to be perfectly fine inside of Uzi. For all we know, she might as well just be a masochist and is actually in intense pain, but just doesn't care. There's also the fact that Uzi, Doll, and the MDs have killed and eaten other drones, yet there's no indication that anyone they've eaten has been assimilated, which is honestly just a wasted potential character death that could have been explored to show how the consequences of killing these other drones have drastically affected those who have killed them. Maybe this is why Doll wants the patch even though Sin never tried controlling her. Maybe this is why Uzi desperately wants answers, is literally being tormented by the voices in her head of the people she killed, but we get none of this. And as a result, merging feels a lot less natural and more like something shoved in for the sake of forcing a pointless plot twist. While it's possible Sin could be repressing Doll due to her supposedly being the bigger fish, that still doesn't change the fact that Doll is technically still alive inside her. And remember, Uzi was able to nullify Sin's control in episode 8 by herself. If Doll was able to merge with Sin and live, then Uzi definitely should be able to as well, with much more devastating effects on Sin due to her having more control over her solver than Doll did. And even if that's the case, that still does not account for Yeva and V. I've seen people argue that V not having fully fledged solver powers means she's immune to being taken over by Yeva, but to be honest it seems like the exact opposite would happen. With Sin, the argument could be made that she has some degree of immunity due to her being the original host, but that's just not the case with V. We know for a fact that murder drones were intended to kill humans, not solver drones. We also know for a fact that whenever they encounter something they're not designed to kill, they usually have a pretty bad time. So if Yeva had full access to her solver and V didn't, that would mean V would have absolutely no defense against this. If anything, it would be much easier for Yeva to take over V's body since the only defense she'd have would be Sin, which sounds like a massive obstacle to overcome until you realize how easily Uzi overturned her control from the MDs. Not once, but twice. Episode 5 really treated it like it was a dire situation, but that's only because Doll showed up at the worst possible time. And Doll surviving, either as a ghost or via merging with Sin, effectively means she had no way of deleting Doll's mind. So even if Sin could repress Yeva remotely for some time, she'd inevitably escape and take over V the second her connection was severed from Sin, causing her to lose V to Yeva's mind in the process, which would be very bad for Sin given that V's mind holds all the valuable secrets being kept from the main characters that Yeva could just spill if she really wanted to. There's also been no argument for the test subjects in Cabin Fever Labs not being able to merge with each other, half of whom had the solver and more than likely being controlled by Sin before they died, which is reinforced by her literally saying the humans kept cutting her feed in episode 7.
Had my suspicions. Thought they kept cutting my feed.
So even if these other defenses of merging are valid, that doesn't change the fact that Sin easily being able to revive them would have altered the show's narrative on a fundamental level. Somebody did comment on my previous video that it's possible the Sentinels aren't compatible with drones and that's why the cores couldn't merge with the Sentinel who ate them, which is possible given what they were used for in universe, but if that were the case, I don't see why Nori, Yeva, or the other test subjects couldn't also be upgraded to make Sin incompatible with them as well. At that point, you may as well just make a whole new type of machine built specifically to counter the solver itself. Anything else is just a huge risk. So now that I have addressed these defenses for merging, I'm going to explain why it just doesn't work from a narrative standpoint. Point 1. Sin merging with Uzi is completely unnecessary and defeats the purpose of episode 8. All of the struggles, hardships, and trauma the characters have endured mean absolutely nothing, because there is no resolution. And Sin just so happens to be the root cause of all the conflict in the series. Imagine if Palpatine, who was the root cause of the conflict in both the prequels and the original trilogy of Star Wars, suddenly came back to life after Return of the Jedi, undermining the resolution of the story and Vader's entire arc throughout the saga. Oh, wait a minute. This is exactly what I mean when I say episode 8 didn't have a proper ending to the story. Regardless of if you like Sin or despise her with every fiber of your being like any sane or rational person should, faking out her death and letting her live past the final episode undermines the show's ending and leaves it without any semblance of closure. Because if Uzi turning into an eldritch monster in the post-credit scene wasn't enough of an indicator, we know Sin will just repeat the conflict of the show all over again and resume the status quo. People like to glaze Sin like she's an inevitable force of nature to justify the merge, but if you don't want to kill her off, just let Sin win and kill everyone instead. Don't deal unnecessary damage to your own narrative just to put her on a golden pedestal. You can argue if it would be a well-written ending, which I don't think it would be, but at least it would be an actual ending instead of just leaving a gaping plotline open with no resolution. The lighthearted ending would actually be improved if you got rid of Uzi and Sin merging altogether, and would allow there to be some semblance of closure that's woefully lacking in the actual ending. You might think a second season would fix this problem, right? Well, let's talk about that. Point 2. The premise of Uzi and Sin merging leaves incredibly little wiggle room for the story to continue without being redundant. Hypothetically speaking, if Murder Drones did get a second season, what's Sin going to do? Like, genuinely. What can she do at this point? Is she going to be the antagonist again? If that's the case, how is she going to enact her evil schemes? Taking control of Uzi's body? This could be an interesting way to develop the characters. There's just one problem. You used this idea already. If this ended up being the conflict of the second season, it would feel a lot less like a continuation of the original story, and more like a retread of the Cabin Fever Labs arc. It would be a lot harder for the story to progress and it would just cause the narrative to stagnate instead of exploring new territories like Season 1 did. Are there changes I'd make to the Cabin Fever Labs arc? Absolutely. Imagine if Uzi actually was being corrupted by her own solver and could eventually surpass even Sin if given enough time, who is unable to control Uzi due to the patch being passed down to her, and as a result wants N to kill her before she becomes too powerful for either of them to take down. Maybe Uzi meets Doll again while she's separated from N and Sin in episode 7, and is told by Doll that N killed Nori and will do the same to her if she lets him. This could have been an interesting way to both flesh out Uzi and Sin a bit more, while also maintaining the dilemma that N is faced with in these two episodes. It also gives Sin an actual reason to want to kill Uzi, when she could have just remotely used her as a weapon beforehand to carry out her own deeds and keep N on her side. I think the concept of Sin having to actually manipulate both N and Uzi to turn on each other is a lot more interesting than just her using Uzi as a puppet, and would allow her to show off those manipulation skills a lot more clearly, while also still allowing Uzi and N to develop as characters. It would also render another major plot hole, Uzi and by extension Nori being able to nullify Sin on their own, completely void, since she'd already have the patch passed down to her via drone genetics. Simply put, it wouldn't be an issue since Sin controlling Uzi is never introduced to begin with. My point here ultimately is that if you want to expand or improve the concepts introduced by the Cabin Fever arc, there's more you can get out of it by rewriting those episodes, instead of just locking yourself in a box creatively and just repeating the conflict post-episode 8. Okay, so controlling Uzi again is off the table. What if Sin somehow manages to escape Uzi's body and finds a new one? At that point, I questioned what the point of even merging these two characters even was in the first place. If Sin has to be the big bad again, then there are other ways you can bring her back without fusing her and Uzi together, treating it like it's really important, only to completely discard it in the next season. Kind of like how Doll, Jay, and the Patch were handled in this series, actually. This would effectively mean we retcon Solver drones being able to completely die for absolutely no reason. So why should we care about Uzi, N, V, J, and Nori's safety if we all know merging is possible now? How do we know Doll and Yeva aren't also going to come back if we know this is possible? We already know Doll's a ghost, or merged with Sin and Uzi, and regardless of which one specifically, we know for a fact she still lives on in some form. So who's to say Yeva or the other Cabin Fever subjects can also do the same and come back as characters in Season 2? Okay, so making Sin the villain again is going to be harder than we thought. Maybe she can just be a side character instead? Now I'm really starting to question what the point of bringing back Sin was if we're just going to put her on the same level as Lizzie. It feels like something Liam would do, though. Take a character who's previously been a major threat and turn them into a complete joke. And before anyone asks, giving Sin a redemption arc is completely out of the question. Redemption arcs are a complex topic and should ideally be handled with care. And even if Murder Drones became a multi-season show for the sake of facilitating this, I don't see any redeemable traits in Sin whatsoever. She's not like V or J, who had traumatic upbringings and had to commit atrocities out of fear of punishment. She's not like Doll, who lost everything and has been chasing revenge against her parents' killer. Hell, even Alice was a drone who was trapped in a laboratory and had to kill other drones just to survive and maintain herself. If her wearing Tessa's fucking skin was not enough of an indicator, Liam clearly just wanted Sin to be evil with absolutely no redeeming qualities. So unless you completely rewrote Sin, redeeming her is just not feasible in the second season alone. Sin, as she's depicted, definitely works as an antagonist for a short series with 8 episodes. The problem is if you try to stretch her beyond that and cause her to overstay her welcome, the flavor she once had is going to wear off very quickly, going from a beloved addition to the series to annoying and eventually outright insufferable. This can apply to any character, but one-note characters who don't develop at all are particularly vulnerable to it. It's only a matter of time before they run out of tricks and become stale. But maybe you plan on developing Sin more as a character instead of just bringing her back for spectacle and fan service. And just because her characterization in the show is minimal doesn't mean there wasn't something there that could be expanded on. Okay, fair point. So how can you bring back Sin without resorting to breaking the show's lore for a last-minute plot twist? Here's an answer to that. Point 3. There are better alternatives to merging that offer more storytelling potential and don't undermine the stakes. Remember how Jay came back in episode 3 and gave us this line in episode 6?
Effective drones were cloned more.
And notice how Sin almost never seems to shut up about the backups she has of all the MDs?
I have backups. Don't worry, your backups will forgive me.
Instead of having them say this is possible and have it only actually happen once in the entire series, perhaps Sin could actually have backups scattered across the stars in the event her main body is destroyed, which gives these cryptic lines and phrases some actual payoff, since this is something that's been alluded to throughout the latter half of the show. Unlike merging, which just came out of nowhere at the very last minute. Is this solution completely foolproof? No, as drones having clones and backups is basically merging before merging. By that I mean it's a pathway for characters to endlessly come back from death, particularly the disassembly drones. However, the amount of clones that exist in the universe is ultimately going to be finite, and unlike merging, cloning as a concept can actually be used as a world-building element and serve a role in the narrative that merging just cannot. For example, let's say V never came back from Cabin Fever Labs and N was forced to confront Sin on his own. She could have used the fact that she has backups of V as leverage against him, forcing him to choose between her and Uzi. N making this choice could add some closure to their relationship and solidify his alliance to Uzi, which would be an excellent way of characterizing him beyond just being a wholesome biscuit boy. Maybe if N died in the finale, you could have Uzi grieve and eventually discover another N in Season 2, only to realize that it's a clone without his memories of Uzi, maybe even an entirely different personality from the original N or representation of him going down a darker path. In fact, Uzi, N, V, and maybe even Nori or Jay exploring the stars and tracking down Sin's backups to destroy them all before they activate could be a storyline a potential second season could explore. Along the way, we could see new planets and even meet new characters on said planets. A plethora of angles to explore, and I'm only scratching the surface. Sure would be a lot more interesting than just Cabin Fever Arc 2, Electric Boogaloo. And don't get me wrong, episodes 6 and 7 are my favorite episodes in the series, but my bias towards them doesn't prevent me from seeing past their flaws, unlike some people. They're both genuinely good, even great in some moments, but they could have been better. And just rehashing all the beats expressed in those episodes and spanning across an entire season doesn't lend itself well to creative ideas. If cloning Sin isn't your thing, I have another solution. Just have her escape the final battle as a core. We all know this is possible because this is what happened to Nori, so just have the same happen to Sin and give her a taste of her own medicine. Given that the amount of drone bodies on Copper 9, it's not long before she finds another post, and since the corpse spires still exist, you can just have her take over them and turn into a full-on kaiju base made of robot corpses, and bam, you now have an antagonist you can use in Season 2. Or maybe none of that's for you and you want a different villain for Season 2. Or maybe you think the show doesn't need a second season. In either case, here's another solution that ties back to my very first point. Don't bring back Sin at all and just let her die. I'm serious. You wouldn't even need to change the ending all that much. Just remove the yellow gradient from Uzi's eyes and she can still reunite with N and V, still give the classroom presentation at the very end as a callback to the pilot, maybe even show that Uzi has acquired both Doll and Sin's abilities, but the consciousness of both drones has been completely destroyed along with their cores. As for what happens with these cores, Doll's was obviously eaten, but Uzi in edgelord fashion crushed Sin's core in her grip and absorbed its energy, killing Sin in the process and taking her powers as her own. For good measure, you can replace that worthless Tails scene with a wholesome Newsy moment and end the series off like that. No pointless cliffhanger bait needed, because that's all merging ever was at the end of the day. It's nothing more than just arbitrarily jingling keys in the viewer's face for a continuation that will never come, without any regard to the show's narrative or world building. Now, I'm perfectly aware that this will rustle the jimmies of some Sin fans, and definitely not simps thirsting over a rotting corpse, but think about it. If Sin's death was permanent, you could conclude the series without ever having to worry about her ever causing trouble again, and allowing it to have some semblance of closure. If you wanted to continue the series but couldn't use Sin again because you killed her off in the finale of Season 1, you could instead show how Sin's actions affected different characters/factions and create new villains from those consequences without having to resort to repeating the main threat of the first season. It's a win-win situation regardless if you wanted to continue the show or leave it as it is. I think I've more than proven that Uzi and Sin merging was the worst possible ending to the show. Before I close out, I have a few things left to say. I know some people are going to look at the thumbnail and say that completely removing it from the canon of the show is a bit much, but with how much damage it does to the rest of the narrative, I think it's necessary to completely retcon it at this point. Merging in murder drones is like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. No matter what angle you look at, it just won't fit. And unlike cloning or solver cores, merging adds nothing to the world building or narrative. In fact, it heavily damages it because it retroactively makes every episode before it pointless. If I know for a fact that Uzi, Nori, Doll, Yeva, Sin, or any other solver drone can just merge with whoever killed them, why am I supposed to care about their safety? Why am I supposed to care whether or not they survive if I know how easily they can come back? If it's revealed that a new character in a continuation of Murder Drones has the solver, why am I supposed to care about them if I know they have a get-out-of-jail card that can pull them away from death's door on a dime? Merging makes it impossible to care about these characters' lives if we know for a fact they're never at any risk of losing them. It nullifies the conflict as a whole and basically just tells the audience, none of this actually matters and we don't care if you notice. That being said, I'm hoping the upcoming graphic novel adaptation acknowledges these flaws and puts in the legwork to remedy them, instead of practically manufacturing them on purpose. Because retroactively undermining the whole series for a last-minute cliffhanger is nothing more than insulting to both the show itself and its fans, and should be treated with the scrutiny it deserves.